we got 4 more to talk about this week before our eventful November comes around. And to start off with, we're going to go into Bad Times at the El Royale, which I was a little afraid at first that I was going to kind of do a disservice to because I saw this like 2 weeks ago. And so I have to kind of let it all come back to me. But the lucky thing about that is this is a movie that stays with you that long. I really had nothing to worry about. I don't even know why I panicked for a minute. But so this is one of those movies that starts right away in the sense that you know those movies that just start and just judging by the first scene alone, you kind of tell you're gonna love it already, and it's like and you don't really because sometimes when that happens you kind of have this bad feeling like oh now the rest of the movie has to live up to this and I don't that's gonna be that's a pretty high bar, but no, there was sort of a comfortable. I feel like we're gonna be fine as soon as this first scene happens and going right into that, directly into the introduction of most of the characters that are going to be in this story, from Jeff Bridges to Dakota Johnson to Cynthia Erivo to John Hamm. And obviously we've got this very sort of colorful cast, but there's also the whole setting, where I was kind of wondering for a second, like, if it was just going to look like it was that setting, or if it was actually in that time period. Well, among many things throughout the movie, John Hamm's behavior towards Cynthia Erivo kind of tells us immediately what era we're in. Not to mention the way that he's dressed. But, and then the way that these characters just bounce off each other, I forgot to mention that Louis Pullman, who is the son of Bill Pullman, is the person that runs the motel. And all these people just immediately, just all these personalities are just bursting out, and you can just tell. And there's always that feeling that you kind of wonder who is even actually the personality they seem to be and who's actually really who they say they are. You know kind of going in it's going to be one of those, but just immediately, and that knowing that going in would also kind of usually give you some sort of doubt, like you're kind of trying to put the pieces together ahead of time, and it might distract you, and that can be a problem, especially if you like always watch movies that way, but you just sort of, it's just so well done as is, you just kind of take it as it comes, and that kind of helps when the surprises come later, because they're sort of, I don't know if they're more surprising because you weren't trying to think ahead, or whatever. Of course, I'm just speaking for myself, I'm surely plenty of people were, and I don't know how the surprises came to them, but for the most part, I found it all very just easy to consume as it was coming. And I also kind of like the detail of seeing the like the guest registry, and we see their different signatures, and what Dakota Johnson does in the scenario, but also the fact that it's almost like you kind of also get a glimpse of their character just by looking at the list of signatures and how much they differ. And this is like a 20 to 25 minute opening before they even go their separate ways outside of the lobby. Which just says a lot about the pacing itself. This is obviously one of those movies where some of the scenes are like really long, because I was a bit surprised when I looked into it and saw that this movie was going on 2.5 hours, and I was trying to figure out how they managed that. But it is sort of that. I don't want to like compare it to Tarantino because that's pretty much what everybody's doing, but it does have that similar instances. But when you look at something like Inglourious Basterds or something, where all of it's getting a lot of Hateful Eight comparisons too, but the way the movie is long, but the scenes are so long and so well paced that once we go from one scene to the other, in another movie it would be like hardly any time has passed when we go from one scene to the other, but because the scenes are so long, it's like from one scene to the next, a large gap of time has happened in that runtime, and you don't even really realize it because the scenes flow so well. So I love that was going on. And then you just have these sort of individual scenes of length that they just sort of let you bask in. So there's like when at the beginning when John Hamm finds all the rows of the mirrors that go both ways and he can see through. And as he's going through like this whole scene, Cynthia Erivo is singing, and the way that works is like not just what her character's doing, but it's like the soundtrack to this scene, and just how much that blends together. They actually use her for that like a few times, and every time it really works, because obviously her voice and performance is just amazing. But it is also, when I talk about the long scenes, it's the one thing that kind of caught me was, and I don't know how much this is going to put people off, because apparently the advertising makes it look like something really crazy and like maybe really nonstop, especially when you see that Drew Goddard wrote and directed it, who co-wrote and directed Cabin in the Woods, and he also wrote The Martian, which everybody knows that I love so much. But there's something much more like meditative here than you're probably expecting in some of these scenes, like long scenes like when Bridges is talking to Arrigo about how he basically loses time, and it just really brings out this humanity in this character that's sort of, I mean, it's Jeff Bridges as a priest, so that seems trustworthy, but we do kind of get like a feel that something is a little off, but the way he sort of just pulls us in and just really makes this character something real in this moment. And the way the scene is shot too, where it's just like right on him and with an occasional reaction shot from her. Um, it's just, yeah, it's just really amazing stuff. And the way the Pullman character is treated also is really surprising when you have this guy that just seems like he's the dude behind the counter. I was thinking a lot of John Hawkes and Identity with him. And the interesting thing about that is he just sort of seems like he's got a little charisma to him, but there's like a comedic value to how like he's just sort of going through the motions, presenting the motel and its gimmick and all that. And you kind of just feel like you get a sense of this character that's just going to kind of be here and probably hang around the front desk or whatever. But then, like, as the movie goes on, like, every new scene that he's in, like, the content of his scenes just gets richer as it goes in many unexpected territories. And the way that he's able to sort of show that progression and make this character more and more, like, well, I said it with Bridges, but I'll say it again, human, really. In these, because usually when you see movies like this, you just sort of imagine, like, sort of thriller characters. You don't really expect much humanity from them. They're just supposed to, here to basically just be, like, cool to fit the cool atmosphere the movie's trying to put off altogether. But no, there's really something to most of these characters. And there's even, you can also get a sense of some of this in the dialogue, like the irony of it, like there was a moment where Pullman has to tell somebody that they have glass in their head. And then, like, all of maybe 20 minutes to half an hour later, the same thing is being said to him by a different character in a different context. So stuff like that always kind of gets me also. There is something about the limited setting that's really nice, going from, like, room to room. They've got, like, the clue title cards for each room and all that. So when they go outside of the motel, which is rare, it can be a bit jarring at first. Like we get into kind of the first whole segment here, and then there's just a cut to Washington D.C. And it's brief, but it just feels so like we've been completely pulled out of this environment that we were in. But then once it comes back, it's fine. But then there's also like, because shortly after that, when we get introduced to Dakota Johnson's sister, I think it is, there's a cut from the motel to a beach. Yet somehow, in this sort of, like, almost like in a Barton Fink way, the way Barton Fink Now Forever has you, like creepy hotels and beaches can go hand in hand because Barton Fink exists. And this movie takes advantage of that, where we cut from the motel to just this really enormous shot of this beach, yet somehow it doesn't feel that jarring anymore. I don't know how they managed to make it mesh so well, but the fact that we also know that stories are going to be coming from different directions, like we're not, like once we're introduced to all the characters in that first 20-minute scene, we're not done having stories coming at this motel still that haven't gotten here yet. And it's really quick to establish that in a way that lets you just sort of take it as it comes, and even if, like I said, it may have felt jarring at first, but after a while, it's kind of perfect. And so that brings us basically to the entire last third. This is going to be, I just imagine this is one of those movies that's victim to that criticism that is just so tirelessly regurgitated and almost, like, about almost every movie in existence anymore. I hear somebody saying this predictable bullshit where they say, oh, the first two-thirds were great, but then the last third it falls apart. and it's like, I can't remember the last time a movie came out where some jackass didn't say that about it, and but the thing about that, I can totally, just absolutely totally see somebody saying that about this movie. But I think it absolutely works in the sense that, where I was talking about, like, a lot of it is much more meditative than you would think. But the thing is also is it's got that familiar setup with the individual scenes where a scene can be really calm and dialogue heavy and just seem like just sort of steady, and then like a burst of violence will happen at the very last minute just to punctuate it, just to completely throw you off, and then repeat for following scenes. And it sort of feels like the entire movie takes that structure, where when you see like the steadiness of the beginnings of scenes and then through the middle and then it's punctuated with the end, it's like the first two-thirds of the movie, despite those punctuations of violence, more or less feel nice and stretched out and all that, and then the last third is just all the craziness, all the violence, all the fire, all that shit. And this comes with the arrival of the Chris Hemsworth character. And here's the thing about what Hemsworth does here is, and when I was saying this before, and I don't think I was giving Pullman enough credit for how intense the finale is as well, because he's got such like this. He's put in a spot that really puts him in this sort of. He's very much ramping up the tension that's going on, we'll say. But I do give a lot of the credit to Hemsworth in a way that I wasn't really at first, until my body was basically telling me what was going on. It was like, it's been a while. Like, I can't remember the last time I had a reaction to a character like this. Because here's what happened. I the end is happening, the climax is happening, and it starts off with basically just Hemsworth monologuing, being his cool Hemsworth self. He's got his shirt unbuttoned, he's got the long hair and all that. But then as it goes on, and obviously we know where his motives lie at this point through a flashback, but the thing here is that as the scene goes on and he becomes less and less like smooth and cool and more threatening and chilling as it goes, particularly this little game that he plays with them to decide who may or may not survive this scene. And the thing about that is that while this was happening, when I went to see this movie, I was on no sleep, so I had had a bunch of coffee before I left. So when this scene was happening, I could feel my heart going insane. And my first thought was, oh shit, the coffee's kicking in. And so that's how I felt throughout the climax, was my heart beating like that. And I had assumed that's what it was all the caffeine or whatever. But then I realized what was going on when eventually, obviously eventually there's going to be a point where Hemsworth is obviously not in the movie. Where it's clear that he is no longer in the story. And when that happened, my heart slowed down, and it got back to normal. And it was, and I realized that seemed to be Hemsworth's character that was giving me that reaction. So that once he's out of the movie, like, everything felt calm again. And it's really weird. Like, I seriously can't remember the last time I had that kind of reaction. So so that's what that is. But then they're still finding time for like backstories and flashbacks and all that, even when we're in the climax. And I do think that maybe it's, I don't know, but like it doesn't necessarily always work, or maybe it seems a bit misplaced. But overall, it does eventually it's probably something that'll work a lot better, like a second time around or a third time around, or however many times I end up seeing this in my life. But which will probably be many. So, like, and every now and then there might be something off, like at the beginning when they're playing with the timeline and we're seeing all the different events from everybody's different perspective. There might be, like, some of the continuity might be off a little bit, but overall, but that could also be, like, so like they talk about with Pulp Fiction, with the difference in Amanda Plummer's line when it comes back around, it's like, there's a slight difference because of the perspective you're seeing. They might be doing something like that. But overall, obviously, I'm a huge fan of this, and then there is, like, when you just look at the individual scenes themselves, like the opening scene with Nick Offerman, or John Hamm behind the mirrors, or Bridges and the floor, all that, Like, so many scenes in this feel like almost instant classics within the thriller genre. Like, and these are scenes that you could imagine in, like, you know, the most acclaimed thrillers of the 70s or something. And it just really fits that vibe through the whole thing. Even if, at first, when I came out of it, I wasn't huge on the flashbacks happening and kind of breaking up the story, but the way it all fits together does give it much more of, like, it feels like it gives it more layers. So there's that. So yeah, just overall, I'm a really big fan of this, obviously. I'm sure it's going to be in the top 10 of the year somewhere, even with all the Oscar movies that still haven't come out yet. But still, I feel pretty confident about that. So yeah, and obviously, Gard is now one of those people where I was already, like, really interested in what he was doing, but now that's so many more times over. So yes. Now I guess we're gonna go on to Night School. You can only imagine how much I was anticipating this. This was definitely one of the most anticipated of the year. An almost 2-hour comedy starring Kevin Hart and Tiffany Haddish. I mean, that has me written all over it, doesn't it? And it's one of those movies where you see it has opening credits, so you see that it's got 6 writers. Fucking 6. I think Hart was the first one, and the only other one I recognized was Nicholas Stoller, who I'll actually talk about next month a couple of times. And this is one of those cases that really shows off, like, especially in comedies where it's like, the more writers you see credited, it's sort of weird because there's more likely that a script practically doesn't exist. Where it's one of those cases where they're just doing whatever lines stick, or even don't stick and they leave in there anyway. So fully expect one of those, because of course, anything and everything that comes out of Tiffany Haddish's mouth, for some reason, is comedy gold to everybody, and must be heard, and in every line she says must make any and all takes, even if they're totally unnecessary. And then we get nice stretched out scenes, like when they go to a fancy restaurant, and Kevin Hart's character puts pubic hair in cheesecake for whatever the fuck reason, I don't remember. And this is a scene that goes on, and not only does this scene go on and on and on, but the character of the waiter he's fighting with becomes a recurring character in the movie. So this joke never dies for the duration of the movie. So you have to get used to that. So it's like all these bad comedies have these jokes that go way too long. This movie really commits. And if you consider that, like, you know, like you admire its its commitment, then have at it. And then, of course, the plot, I guess, is obviously Hart has, like, a learning disability. When he sees math problems or whatever, the numbers, like, literally come off the screen and, like, attack him and shit. So he lies to his rich girlfriend who he's living off of and says, "Oh yeah, I've got this really great job." But he lost, like, this business he was going to inherit because he, like an idiot, blew the building up, and then the dude ran off with the insurance money. So he's stuck here working at this chicken restaurant, this Christian chicken restaurant, which they squeeze a few jokes out of, a few too many out of. And he basically lies that he has this great job while he's actually going to night school and being taught by Tiffany Haddish. It's kind of ironic, Tiffany Haddish playing a teacher when her grammar is just off the charts terrible, but that's beside the point. And it sets up like it's going to be like this weird sort of format in regards to how they introduce the characters, because I guess you could say he's the villain of the movie, Taran Killam, who's like the principal now, who is... They kind of... It wasn't so much a bullying. They kind of bullied each other in school. It seemed, at least this what this flashback seems to be. But the thing is like, we have the starting point. It's like fucking Central Intelligence all over again. We've got them in school and that whole flashback. But then, and we see Taran Killam's character there in that first scene before it flashes forward. But the thing is that when we return to the Taran Killam character, when he runs into him at the school again, there's another flashback to show their sort of interaction. And I was kind of thinking, like, is this going to be a recurring thing, this whole flashback thing? But it's like, no, that's the only time. That's the only time that happens. Just to further solidify who that character is, even though they probably could have done that in the opening, but it doesn't matter. And so it goes on into all these obvious jokes, like how every white guy wants to be in some sort of black media, whether it be movies or TV. The dude that runs the barbecue place wants to be Mr. Drummond to his Gary Coleman, and then there is the whole Taron Killam joke throughout the whole movie is that he's trying to be Morgan Freeman and Lean on Me. And they just keep bringing that back over and over again. He's got his black guy voice they, call out. And so it's full of that. If you still think that's the height of hilarity, then you're gonna fucking love this. And then, also in regards to lazy jokes, we meet all the other students that he's in night school with. And there's this whole long-ass scene of each of them getting their thing, where it's like, hey, I'm Rob Riggle, and this is my one joke throughout the movie. And hey, I'm Marilyn Ricecub, and this is my one joke throughout the movie. And hey, I'm Romany Malco, this is my one joke throughout the movie. And this just goes on and on. Fat Joe is a dude that's like in prison, and he's there via laptop and all that. Every character is like one goddamn joke that the movie sticks with the whole time. And I talk about how those scenes are so long. This is not like a Bad Times at the El Royale, the scenes are so long thing. This is a totally different thing where, like, there's actually a moment where they go through the whole thing where they're going to break into the school and, like, steal the test answers and all that. And the thing about that is that you would think they're going to do this sequence, it's going to have a couple of payoffs, probably some physical comedy, a gag here and there, and then it'll fail and then they'll move on. And it'll just be a little, like, maybe 5 or 6 minute scene or something. This scene where they break into the school is so long, I actually became convinced that it could have been the rest of the movie. And it was like halfway through. And it just keeps going and going. Even when they're outside the school afterwards, this scene will not stop. And it becomes like a whole middle portion of the movie, and there's like no big payoff to it. Like nothing at all. And of course, that's, you know what, you're watching it and you're like, what is it? What is the last thing that this movie needs? Like, all these dragged out scenes, all these really forced jokes, and this movie is almost 2 hours long. What is the very last thing this movie needs right now? But a part of you just knows is here. And you know to anticipate it, and you know it's coming. Yes, there is a scene when the adults in night school decide they're going to crash the prom. And what do you think this consists of? Of course, prolonged scenes that are just dancing. As I say again, that's exactly what this fucking movie needed this far into it at this point. So, there's that shit. And then on top of all this predictable bullshit, on top of all the lazy jokes, we've also got a lazy story. Because as I said, he's lying to his girlfriend about the fact that he's in night school, as opposed to the job that she thinks he has. So of course this is going to be the he's covering up a lie story. And of course we're going to get to the point in the story where the lie is uncovered by the villain. And then there's that whole conflict. But the thing is not only is this just a tired conflict that would have sucked regardless, but we see his girlfriend has like 3 scenes. It's like there's the beginning, there's like a scene in the middle, and then there's like this scene. This is like the 3rd time we've seen her. And we're supposed to get the whole she's upset he's been lying scenario. So that just it already doesn't work. Like, even if they were doing some things right, it still just overall would not work. But they're just so caught up in the shit that doesn't matter, or just dragging out the shit that's already not working. It's like they're intentionally trying to make a movie that doesn't work. I don't know how this process goes. That's what happens when you have 6 fucking writers. That's one thing. But then, of course, eventually it's going to get to a point where they still try to do the comedy thing. There is a funny bit towards the end when, like, it gets to the big moment where he takes the big test and all that, and it's, like, the big climax, and he fails it, and then the climax ends up being him just retaking it over and over and over again. That's pretty funny. But if you don't think, this movie ends with some heartfelt graduation speech by Kevin Hart, you are fucking blind. So that on top of that as well, the movie tries to be heartfelt and end with a speech. That's what Night School is. That's pretty honestly, it's probably exactly what you're expecting. If you're me, that makes your heart sink. If you're somebody who's a fan of Kevin Hart or Tiffany Haddish, then that's probably music to your ears. But I can't do this shit. Definitely, it's obviously definitely trying to be Summer School, the 1987 movie with Mark Harmon, which is so significantly more entertaining than this. You absolutely should seek that out if you're interested in this for its story at all. But also a movie that can make its jokes work also throughout the whole runtime. It's, yes. So, but it's Kevin Hart, so I shouldn't be surprised at all, really. So, yeah, just another lazy-ass Kevin Hart comedy to add to the long-ass list of them there. This will just disappear when the next one comes out in probably the next couple of fucking months or something. So, let's go on. The tired comedy's not over yet. Let's go ahead and talk about Johnny English Strikes Again. I get it that some people like these movies. I was kind of surprised to learn that, but they're out there. Like, the movie's fan base is out there, because the first thing you think is, like, why do we need another one of these? And it's like, why did we even need the second one? It's like, none of these... but no, they have a fan base. They, they do. They're out there somewhere. But the thing about me going into this is that I remember it was 2003, because it was around the time Pirates of the Caribbean was out for some reason. That's how I associate it. When the first movie came out. And, of course, I'm like 11 or 12 at this point, so the trailers are funny to me. And we were going to, like, movies as a family regularly at that time, too. And so we always saw that damn trailer. And it looked like it was going to be, like, the funniest fucking thing in the history of the world. So, it comes out, and to me, the first movie was one of those movies where... because when you're a kid and you go to a movie that's silly like that, it's pretty easy for silliness to grab hold of you, and you just go along with it, and you laugh and all that, and then you go on your way. Even as a kid, watching the first Johnny English, my stomach dropped. Because when I realized, oh fuck, this is not, this is not funny. Oh shit. And then of course when the second one rolled around, however many years later, a bunch of years later, it's almost entirely out of my head now. The only thing Dana Kaluuya was his partner and Dominic West was the villain. That's all the memory bank has on Johnny English Reborn, apart from its title. So going into this, it was like, I wasn't angry that it existed, but I was like, this will have no impact on me. I will barely have an opinion on this, I guarantee it. So what happens, and it's also a problem, like, it's not just that it's like, is a sequel necessary, but it's like, is the movie necessary as a whole? Because obviously long before the first one even came out, we had Austin Powers, and Get Smart existed. The Steve Carell movie didn't exist yet, but Get Smart as a whole existed. Our Man Flint existed. The Bond parody has been happening forever, but it's like, if you're something like Austin Powers, you find a way to still do something with that. And then John English comes out, it fails, and then they have a sequel that's underwhelming. And then by the time this one comes out, we've got Kingsman as well. And it's like, what can this movie do? This movie really shot itself in the foot by deciding to exist in a post-Kingsman world. Because it's like, that's kind of... obviously they go... Because Kingsman is like so R-rated and John English is much more family-friendly, especially in comparison. So they can do different things, but overall it just feels so futile at this point to even be attempting this, especially with something that feels so long delayed. But they are doing the... They basically do the Skyfall plot, which is what Rowan Atkinson is actually saying in interviews. So it's like, that must be intentional. And it's interesting to see Rowan Atkinson doing, like, going back into this stuff, because it is, like, you would never tell looking at him that there's been so many year gaps, and there's like the movies are just so fucking tired at this point. I thought they were from the get go, but the energy is still kind of there, but they really just they don't seem to take advantage of his willingness to do this. Where like the whole thing about him as a performer is his physicality, and this movie just so does not use that. Like one of the funnier bits in the movie is a scene that just is him going off the screen, and we don't really see him do any type of pratfall or anything like that, because obviously it would have been dangerous. But it's when he like tries to smoothly jump off the yacht after he said the line to Oleg Kurylenko, and he just hits the ground. And it's like, with their comedy going like that, it's like, it does work in that context for the little bit that it's there, but there's like so much more that he himself can do to get this comedy out. But the most they do is like the most that physicality comes out is he dances to Sandstorm while he's on some pill that makes him hyperactive. And it's like, that's, you can just see kind of all the wasted opportunities here. It all just feels very, very flat, despite its trying so hard to be, you know, such a big comedy, a big broad comedy. And it's even got the obvious shit in there, like the very beginning. Like, they set off the plot immediately, where it's like all the agents' identities are compromised, so they need somebody that's retired, that's basically out of the system. So the plot sets up that he's retired, that he's not doing this anymore. But they still try to do the fake-out opening, when we see him on some sort of mission in the night or whatever, some action scene or whatever. And it's like, well, we know what the fucking punchline is when this scene starts. Because not only is it just the biggest cliche in the history of the world, we know he's retired. You just fucking told us that. So why even try this old joke? But they do it anyway. So, and that's basically what this movie is. It's like, that old joke, that never works. We're gonna do it anyway, but it never works. And they try to bring back a little something. Like if you have like those feelings towards the first movie, like if you have a soft spot for the first movie, the fact that Boff is in this one, because I'm pretty sure he wasn't in the second one. So to bring that character back, you can sense they're trying to bring back some sort of magic, if you want to call what the first movie was, but I don't know, it just feels like they're still going through the same shit, the same tired jokes and all that stuff. And then there's a plot here where we're trying to figure out who this giant hacker is that's exposing all the agents, and it's like, so we're introduced to Jake Lacy playing this huge, rich tech dude who has connections to the Prime Minister, and he has these big, important meetings and all these different plans, and it's like, okay, who do you think the bad guy is? Who do you think the hacker is? It's like, wait a minute, a tech genius that's the villain, that's using this tech to wreak his havoc. Oh yeah, that was Samuel L. Jackson in Kingsman, among every other, other Bond villain in the history of the world. But, I mean, just as recently as Kingsman doing this feels like, why? Why are we even doing this? Like, why are we even watching this? Why does it exist? I don't know. Props to them about, I mentioned Oleg Kurylenko, at least, it is interesting that they did get, like, an actual Bond girl. Even if it's, like, a bit low tier of Bond girl when you think about the quality of the movie, but still, it's something. It brings something here. Like, it gives you that but, and, like, occasionally there's, like, a small gag that works. Like, when he sets up to, like, blow the door off so they can get out, and he's like, there's gonna be a slight pop, but it's this big explosion that deafens him. So just things like that do work in those small doses, but overall, it's like I said, they just feel tired and like they're doing the same shit. It really feels like the same gags from the other movies, even if it's not quite. Like, it feels like you just have seen this all before. And then, of course, they have to bring in, like, the fact that the movie's in 2018 now, so they've got, like the phone scene where they just have to reference social media, just because it's like, well, it's in that era, we have to do this somehow. And then, like, with Jake Lacy's character, they talk about how, like, he's famous because he dated a Kardashian or something before, amidst all this tech stuff he does also. And it's like, it just feels so forced in there, like they're trying to seem like it's, like they're self-aware that they're in a certain time now, but it's it still feels off. So, and just falls flat. So then there's like jokes that go on way long, like him and like the knight armor or the virtual reality thing, where it feels like these are like the big jokes. These are the ones that are like people are gonna walk away with, and it's like there's just not a whole lot going on offer wise for that. And a lot of and it's weird how many times like the punchline to a lot of jokes is like I can just imagine this in the script. It's like the punchline is music plays loudly. Like that's the punchline to many jokes in this. It's just music plays loudly, and I don't know. You can tell. Like I don't like I said I don't know how this got past a certain stage where we're like, yeah, we can make this, like this is filmable. So it's yeah, like you would think there'd have to be like much more of a purpose for them to go on again, but like I said, apart from that fan base they've got, I don't see anything here. And the problem is that because the jokes are so obvious and because the story's so bland, despite the fact that they're doing everything they can to throw themselves around and do all these big jokes, it's kind of surprising how boring it feels after a while, especially in that middle stretch, where you're just kind of tired of it eventually. Not to mention that I mentioned the Prime Minister, who's played by Emma Thompson, who they totally waste. She's got one line here or there where she like really gets to go for it, but overall, it's really a waste of her. So yeah, and it's like I said with the fact that we already have like way too many parodies, but like I said, even with Austin Powers or Kingsman, show that no matter how dated the idea might seem that we can spoof Bond movies, every now and then something comes along that still makes it feel fresh, weirdly enough, and still makes it work. These are never gonna be those movies, like ever. That's when it makes you feel like, okay, we do have enough of these, and like if you're gonna feel like I said, Atkinson's the way he does things feels so underused. What he's best at, and the reused and redundant jokes and all that, just really makes it feel pointless overall. Just the whole thing. So I don't. Like I said, I was hoping to be a little nicer to it and warm up a little to it, but as it just went on, it just gets kind of worse and dumber, and yeah, so it's not too much different from what I was expecting from the get-go, so there that is. So let's end on Private Life. Netflix is on a weird little streak here. I wonder if they can keep it up. Private Life is a movie starring Paul Giamatti and Catherine Hahn as a middle-aged couple who can't have children. She doesn't, like her body's not working the way it used to, and he only has one ball and it doesn't really work. But so they're trying all these different things, and the writer-director is Tamara Jenkins, who made like The Savages and Sons of Beverly Hills. So on that surface, even down to the casting of Giamatti and Hahn, you might think, okay, this is one of those movies that's going to be like really critically acclaimed and really small and character driven and all that. It's like you can see like the acclaim coming from a mile away, but it's still, because you still have that talent, it's like even if you look at it from that cynical perspective, it's still probably going to really work really well. So, and the thing here is that there's actually quite a bit of things that this movie is doing. I was a little put off that it's just a little over 2 hours. But it does have a lot that it's doing, where it does seem like, I was talking about how they're going through these different medical procedures to try to have a child, and so there's, like, we start off with this, and you sort of think that's going to be what the movie is. But then, like, it has other things that it's going to do, and the way it sort of seamlessly, like, it doesn't feel like it's one thing, then it's another, then it's another. It just kind of seamlessly flows from one thing to the next, while still telling the same story. Just having these sort of developments that keep coming as it happens. And even these opening scenes where like if you've ever been in a hospital, you're gonna like feel this. You're gonna be able to like smell those rooms basically, with how real these places are portrayed. And you've got Dennis O'Hare, who's their doctor, and it's like there's something just the way he does this, it's like you could listen to Dennis O'Hare go through these medical procedures and describe these medical terms like all day, and you wouldn't get tired of it. So having characters like that amidst this too really helps. because it does seem like it would be a bit of an obvious movie and sort of like a type of drama that we've seen before and stuff like that. But there's a lot of things that bring it to life in a way that those other movies can't. Um, and then you've got some side characters. And once again, I really like the way they sort of. It seems like they're introducing one thing that's on an entirely different planet, but then as it sort of comes right back into it, and sometimes in the way you don't think, like shortly after we've really gotten to know what the Giamatti Han situation is, we cut to Molly Shannon and John Carroll Lynch, and John Carroll Lynch is the stepbrother of Giamatti, and once we see them, you sort of think it's going to be like a parallel story, and it's going to be a movie that's about these two couples. Until the scene progresses and you realize that the Shannon and Lynch characters, while they are important, we're starting on them only because they're serving as the introduction to the real major character in this scene, who is their daughter. And ways like they sort of play with that to where you're not quite sure who's being introduced or how they're going to fit into the story when you first meet them, but then the way they sort of just, like I said, just flow right into that, and then everything comes back around. Um, and they do have cases where, like, some of these characters may on the surface seem like they're hard to like, or like they're going to be annoying. Like the daughter character, where it's like she's sort of very contradictory in the sense that obviously she's still kind of discovering herself, but it's like she's a hipster that hates hipsters basically, and she's kind of somewhat willing to admit that, but not entirely. Um, and but the thing about that though that really makes her easy to stick with, regardless of if she might seem a little irritating at first, is this relationship she has with Giamatti and Han's characters, where it's like that's a large portion of the appeal of this movie is the relationship between the three of them, and how they almost have like their own separate family going on. How she feels much closer to them than she does her own parents, and how there's like so much love and understanding between them, and how real that feels between them. Really is kind of the heart of the movie. But then there's also stuff like the Molly Shannon character, who does seem like, I mean, I guess she is supposed to be like she's supposed to be a bit irrational, and she's like everything is like the end of the world, and it's like she's kind of supposed to be like, I can't tell for sure if we're supposed to outright dislike her or not. We never really despise her though, because the movie makes her real enough. And Molly Shannon's an amazing actress enough. Even though the character doesn't get to do much and she doesn't have a lot to work with, she's still able to do just enough to make it to where, like, we can see where she's coming from, especially when, like, with the frustration, because we see a similar frustration that's shown in a different way, that's expressed in a different way, from Giamatti and Han, where they're like, because they've done this for so long, it's to the point to where they've almost forgotten the time when they weren't doing this. They've been trying this fertility thing for so long, and it just keeps failing, and they keep falling short, and they have a frustration towards that, how much time they spend on it, how much time has been wasted, and it's gone now. And that's the similar frustration that Shannon's feeling when she reacts the way that she does, even if it seems antagonistic to them. It's coming from the same place, so it still adds that whole sort of humanity to it, even if it's a character that seems like on the surface we're just instantly supposed to not like, and hope that she eventually comes around to them or whatever. Um, and the thing about this is also, is like, the portrayal of it is like, because obviously when they're going through this, they're going to run into a lot of problems, and they're going to keep failing and have to keep trying and all that. And obviously it's a sad state to watch these people, especially when you realize just how, like, real of a situation it is. But the thing here is, like, the way they're portrayed, like, so directly, and, like, the performances are so honest about it, it's like the sympathy you feel for them is like really natural. Like you feel the sympathy for them without the movie feeling like it's ever asking for it, which is really important for a movie like this, where you just naturally go in that direction, and it's not like the movie's trying to say like wallow with them or feel sorry for them or whatever. And that's whether it be the writing or the performances, all that, everything's working together here to make sure that happens. And then there is, like, moments where they really settle in the reality, like, and make it realistic, even when we want to see drama, even when we want to kind of have them break out of the look how real things are thing and go into, a real dramatic scene, like a big sort of melodramatic scene. When, like for instance, when the girl is told off by this doctor and she says she was like yelled at and like, basically degraded. And Giamatti gets out of the car and goes in there to make a scene and scream at the dude. And like, we want to see him like go off on this dude. We want to see him like punch the dude out. But then there's this really real moment when Giamatti like catches himself in the moment and sees that he's being stared at, and just kind of like has to walk away with his tail between his legs anyway. And it's like there's something so sort of like I said, even when you want to see him go off on that dude, it's like you still appreciate the yeah, that's how it would go aspect of it. Especially for like a character played by Paul Giamatti. This is the exact way that would happen for him. Um, Occasionally there are moments that it does feel like it could be a bit trimmed down, or maybe they play with it a little too much. Like when the story progresses into them asking the daughter for her eggs to try that, and there's this whole segment when they're trying to build that up and they're real nervous about it. And it just happens to be while they're having breakfast. So they ask her about her eggs, and she assumes they're talking about the food. And then once that's that, they're like, okay, I guess we won't ask yet. We're still too scared. And it's like stuff like that does feel like it's maybe dragging it a little bit, and we could just jump right to the really good and still realistic scene where they do eventually ask her, and we wouldn't have lost anything, and the movie would have been maybe a bit, tighter, but yeah. And then, of course, to further add to the characters also, there is, like, sort of like a parallel thing going on here, like the parallel dreams in their life where they have, because there's this dream that they both have of the, having the child that's just not coming to fruition, but then there's also, like, Giamatti was once living his dream as an actor, and Han is, like, trying to write a book that's not quite getting there, and it's like, so it's in pretty much any dream in their life is not quite getting there, and any time it's brought up that he used to be an actor or she hasn't finished her book yet, it's just like further driving the fact that they aren't really reaching the place that they want to be, and really driving the whole baby thing even more. Stuff like that. And then stuff like the Halloween scene is really good too, when children come to the door on Halloween and they've just forgotten that it was a holiday. So they just kind of have to stand there and wait for the kids to go away, and it takes the kids forever to get the hint. And there's just that distance they feel from the children out there. It's like just the idea of children and that distance between them, you can just sense that and how it's, related to their thing here, and just really adds to that further drama of it, and really, like, it's one of those things that just really makes you feel for them, even if, the movie's not outright asking you to do that. And the fact that they're able to do that, like, so effortlessly, because when I talk about the realism in the movie, usually I'm on movies' cases about that, where it's like, they're trying way too hard for the realism thing, and it's like, because you can pretty much just see their wheels turning and all that, and it makes it feel much less authentic, but it's like, and there's something like so self-satisfied about movies that do that too, right? You can just kind of sense that they're proudly saying, look how real we're portraying this. You don't get that from this at all. Like, this feels so sort of like grimy in how real it shows everything, and how it's not trying to show off in really any way whatsoever. It just feels like we're sort of just watching them, like, in this almost voyeuristic way. And like I said, all the stuff from the writing and Jenkins' direction and Giamatti and Haas's performances, and the girl who plays Sadie too, whose name I forgot. I looked it up when I started and then I forgot it again. But she's very good also. So yes, that's really good stuff. That like I said, it's just hanging out on Netflix. So if that's your thing, you definitely want to look into it. So that's what we have here. So some really good stuff with some shitty comedies in between, just sandwiched right in between. But then next week we've got like Bohemian Rhapsody. I think Beautiful Boy is supposed to be wide at some point. Not that means it's gonna be here, but it potentially could. So when I got my ticket for Halloween, some young girl behind me was in line talking about Beautiful Boy, and it's a Chalamet fan, of course, but still. So like maybe there's a chance it'll be here, but I don't know. But and then probably a few other things as well. that I'm not remembering off the top of my head. But so yeah, so until all that stuff